Julius Caesar marched in and they sailed across the English Channel and landed in England in about 55 BC. Now, they didn't stay long, but the Roman armies that followed them did, and they landed and colonized the island for about 500 years. The time in history is known as the Roman occupation of Britain. That's a bust of Julius Caesar, in case you were wondering. That's kind of what he looked like. That's the man. Now, when the Romans came, they built roads, and this is a mile marker in England. These are some of the Roman roads that are famous throughout the world, built by Roman soldiers and slaves. There's probably 20 or 30,000 miles of this through the UK. They also built forts. They built bathhouses. They built luxury homes. There's even a wall around Scotland here. It was built by another Caesar named Hadrian Caesar. The wall is about 80 miles long. There's a shot of it here. They say you can cross it in about 3 days. Has anyone ever been to England and seen that or walked that before? Have you? It's pretty impressive, isn't it? It's supposed to be 15 feet high, 10 feet wide. It was basically designed to keep the people up above that line out of their territories. Apparently, the people in Scotland didn't like being invaded, so they fought back.
This is 15 feet tall and 10 feet wide?
Yeah.
And then
it's in the ruins right now, but it goes 80 miles across the bottom of Scotland. Mm. It's really famous. This is the emperor that...
You sure Trump wasn't there? It's only 80 miles long.
Hadrian Caesar, right there. Okay, now our first artifact is to the south of Hadrian's Wall, up there in a place called Lydney Park. Lydney Park is an area down here, just below London, about 2 hours west of London, and it's an archaeological paradise. The Romans in the 4th century began to mine this area, and they found tin and copper and gold, and they sent all that back to Rome for the war machine. Now, during the excavations in the early 1900s, they found a temple floor. This is the foundation for it. The emperor who was in charge was Theodosius Caesar, and that is his coin. Now, on this floor, this temple floor, there is an inscription. It's written to a god. It's dedicated to a particular god named Nodens. Now, Nodens was a Celtic god. He was the god of the sea. And the inscription that we're going to see is written in Latin, and it basically says, "To the god Nodens, Titus Flavius Civilis, officer in charge of the supply depot of the fleet, laid this pavement out of money offerings, the work being in the charge of Victorinus, interpreter of the governor's staff." Now, Titus Civilis was the man in charge of the supply depot as the Roman armies brought their goods into their assorted soldiers. It would land in Gloucester County, where this particular place is. The person who actually did the work is a man named Victorinus, and his name is on this art piece. This art piece is in the Roman Museum in Lydney Park, and this is the piece. Now, I want you to look around the corners. First of all, it comes from Genesis Park, which is Garth's website. It's one of the best pictures out there of that particular mosaic. And it's a sea scene. You notice there's fish around it, all in the corners. There's fish in the corner on the left. On the bottom right, there seems to be some kind of a whale. But what are the two creatures in the middle? What do those look like to you? Kind of interesting, isn't it? Look a little close up here. They're long-legged, long-bodied. There's a rib cage right there. If you take off the horns, you would find something that we would identify as maybe a creature in a museum. We would know what that looks like. The question is, how did a Roman soldier 1,600 years ago draw something that we recognize as a dinosaur? How would he do that? Where would he get the information for that? We have the information because we've seen hundreds and hundreds of pictures of dinosaurs in our lifetime. We've seen them in movies, on t-shirts, in books, cartoons. We know what they look like because we've seen them. How do they know what that looks like? And why is that something so close to what we would say is a dinosaur, and it's over 1,600 years old? These are soldiers living on an island, Roman army.
Which island?
England.
In England.
England, yeah. All right, now notice something else about this. This is interesting. If you look at the legs are almost sketched in. You notice how according to detail the body is, but look at the front legs. It's almost as if it was an afterthought. The person who was doing this, Victorinus, did not really know what to do with the feet. And that's compelling. Karaoke time. All right, now look also at the bottom of the belly of this one here. Notice it's not going into a tail or into legs, it's curved over. Now the Romans, like most people of antiquity, believed that dragons originally came from the water. Did you know that? All the land animals, land dragons that are in history, generally they believe came from out of the water.
The Romans.
Everybody did. And the question is why? Were they seeing something in the water that they could identify with things on the land? That's the question. And the bigger question is why, if you're going to dedicate a mosaic to a god, the god of the sea, why would you have this particular god with those dragons on the ship? I mean, on the mosaic floor? That's the question. How would they know what to draw? Why would they draw that? To me, this kind of a creature, if you have a water scene like this, it would look more something like that. Something you would see in the water. And the question is, of course, did they see something in the water as they went back and forth across the Atlantic Ocean? Now, we know the Vikings did. They used to draw or put dragon heads on their ships because they were afraid of things in the water. That's why they call them dragon boats. If you look at the tops of all the boats, they're supposed to scare off things in the water. Now, I'm not sure how much we know about the Vikings, but they were not known to be a real timid people. You know, they sailed across 3 continents and burned their way all the way through. They were fearless until they got into the water. They were afraid of things in the water. And it's not just the Vikings, of course. It was the English, it was the South American Indians, the North Americans, it was the Fijians, the Chinese, the Koreans. Every culture that has a shipping industry has these stories of these great reptiles in the sea. Let's go a little further. Now, it's not just in the old days. This is a woodcut from a man named Olaus Magnus. He's an archbishop of one of the larger cities in Europe, 1550. In his day, apparently, there were creatures so large they would snatch crewmen off the ships and drag them down to their death. Here is this is from a copper plate. There's a book by an archbishop now, the Lutheran Church, named Eric Pontippidan. And he has in his book this drawing of a creature that was shot by a captain of a ship in the Swedish Army, or Swedish Navy, I'm sorry. This is kind of the picture of it. Some huge creature. Now, this is the description that the captain gave to our archbishop. He said the head of this snake, they usually called things in the water snakes no matter what they were, because it looked serpentine, looked like some kind of a reptile. This head of the snake, which it held more than 2 feet above the surface of the water, resembled that of a horse. It was of a grayish color, and the mouth was quite black and very large. It had black eyes and a large white mane that hung down from the neck to the surface of the water. Besides the head and neck, we saw 7 or 8 folds or coils of the snake, which were very thick, and as far as we could guess, there was about a fathom's distance, which is about 6 feet between them. Now, this is from Captain Lawrence de Ferry. He is the captain of the ship. Most of the time when sea people have some kind of a sighting, they'll go down in the bar, right? And they'll start talking and drinking, and pretty soon that little sea monster is a huge thing. Well, this captain didn't go to the bar. He went down to court and filed a deposition with 2 of his men saying this is what they saw. He goes on to say that they got close enough to it to take a shot at it, and they hit it in the neck, and it spurted blood. The thing dove underwater, and after a few minutes, there was blood in the water, and that creature never came back up again. Giant reptile in the water. This is a man who's a very famous man in Greenland. His name is Hans Egede. He was so famous, literally, as a missionary that they named him the Apostle to Greenland. The Swedish government not only has statues of him, but they've got a postage stamp in his honor. He went to the Inuit Indians in Greenland to preach the gospel to them. On his way over, he and his shipmates saw that creature in the water. Huge creature, and this is his description of it. On the 6th of July, 1734, when off the south coast of Greenland, a sea monster appeared to us whose head, when raised, was on level with our main top. The sea monster was as high as the ship. Its snout was long and sharp. It blew water almost like a whale. It had large, broad paws, or fins. Its body was covered with scales. In other respects, it was as a serpent. And when it dived, its tail, which was raised in the air, appeared to be a whole ship's length from its body. Now, that's quite something for a missionary of the gospel to say as he's sailing down towards Greenland. There are huge things that have been seen in the water, huge reptile-like creatures in the water throughout history. This particular drawing was done by the first mate and the captain of the ship, the SS Sacramento, as they went from New York through the Atlantic down to Australia. Notice it carefully. It's got kind of the head, an alligator-like head. It's got fins there and a very long body. We're going to see that creature again in a dictionary a few years later. This is another eyewitness account, eyewitness drawing of a ship that was attacked by a giant creature. This is the SS British Banner. Now notice this creature was as long as the ship, and it attacked the ship as it was moving through the water. The front of the ship is called a bowsprit. That's where you tie the main line to. The creature attacked that as if it was trying to really wrestle and bring down that vessel. These are all very sober men, very serious men, and they're talking about things they've seen in the water. Finally, in 1880, there was a creature that came into the Jersey shore, and it created a big furor. It was a huge creature, and what was really unique about it, besides blowing water out of its nostrils, is that it rolled like this. Now, if you've ever seen serpents or sea serpents, they don't swim like this, they swim like this. Serpents on the ground are back and forth, they don't do this. That particular creature was doing like this. A whole different kind of animal in the water. Now, Noah Webster, you know his 1828 dictionary, he has a creature that they dragged up in a fishing line in 1749. This creature resembled in some degree an alligator, but having two large fins which served for swimming or flying, it had two legs terminating in hoofs like that of an ass. Its body was covered with impenetrable scales, and it had 5 rows of teeth. It looks very much like that kind of a creature. Resembles an alligator. Same area, same Atlantic area along the coast of Europe. In fact, if you look at this and kind of put it up with the fossil record, we would find something very similar to that. That's a mosasaur. Same alligator head, same fins right here. Here are the fins. Very long body. The bottom fins would be underwater. It's a very similar creature. This is supposed to be extinct 65 million years. And yet we see something that, if you look at it close enough, it's pretty close to resemblance. Things get pretty big out in the ocean. In fact, not just in the ocean, there's some pretty large things you can find on the beach as well. That's an actual photograph, folks. I think it was a joke. It was a joke photograph. But it seems that this creature was in the water recently. We don't know for sure. We think we found its mate, though, Edna. So this particular slideshow is called Dinosaurs in Ancient Art. And there are so many photographs and so many slides and so many bits of art that it's very hard to put them all together in one presentation. So we're going to kind of narrow it down to Italy, to Israel, and the Middle East. Now, let me catch up with my slides here. Let's see. Okay, what we're going to do tonight is basically art appreciation. Does everyone know what that is? What is art appreciation? Give me a good example. You can read that one. What's the definition for art appreciation? You're looking at something somebody did, and you try to figure out what they're trying to say, right? You don't need a degree for that. You don't need to be a scientist. You just need to look at that and say, this is what it looks like to me.
Would that be more like art
Yeah, that's good too. We can use that as well. Either one. We're going to appreciate the art as we go through. So let me catch up here. Now, I am not a scientist. I actually don't want to be a scientist. I'm not the least bit interested in being a scientist. But I am a Christian, and like you, I'm interested in sort of these things because they reflect on my Bible, on the Word of God. I need to remind you, as we go through this is kind of a fun presentation. We can't prove that any of the things that we see are dinosaurs because we can't talk to any of the people who did them. They're all dead. So we can't ask them what they actually saw. But what we can do is look at it and examine it and try to see for ourselves what it is they're trying to represent. And that's what we're going to do. Let's see. Let me catch up here a little more.
In interpretation, we've got prima facie interpretation. So we really interpret.
Yeah.
So we go to prima facie.
This is like fossils. We're looking at a piece of art, a one-time shot in history, and we're trying to see what it says in the larger picture of the world.
Called prima facie.
Prima facie examination. Very good, sir. So nobody should get mad, right? This is all you just kind of see what it is to you. Now, we're going to see a lot of pictures here, and most of them have been seen already. They're already kind of common, but for some reason, they're really not well known. And perhaps when we get through a lot of them, you'll see why they're not so well known. They seem to show something that goes contrary to the current worldview in our country. Now, to find out the question we have about dinosaurs in ancient art, we want to ask ourselves, if God made the world at the beginning, we need to start back at the beginning. If there are dinosaurs around today, if these are creatures that have lived with man, do they go back to the book of Genesis? That's the question. And if they do, where do we find them? So we're going to kind of look at this because it's an important thing. Now, I'm a pastor, and it's an important thing because when evolution rose from Darwin's milieu, it became an attack on the book of Genesis. It was that way from the beginning, and it's that way to this day. Let me tell you why. When Jesus was talking to the Pharisees, they asked him a question about marriage, and Jesus said, Matthew 19:4, "Have you not read that he which made them at the beginning made them male and female? And he said, for this cause shall a man leave father and mother, and shall cleave to his wife, and they shall become one flesh." Jesus Christ is quoting Genesis chapter 1 in verse 4 and Genesis chapter 2. He's making a doctrinal statement and a definition about marriage based on a passage in Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. If Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 are not actual history, this is a nonsense statement. He's basing the idea of marriage on those two events. Further, 2 Corinthians 4 says, "For God who commanded the light to shine out of the darkness has shined in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of Jesus, of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ." When did God command the light to shine out of the darkness? Day one. If that's not a true statement, then God can't shine the light of Christ in our hearts either, because it's a nonsense statement. It didn't happen. The Old Testament and the New Testament are woven together. The book of Genesis is woven through the New Testament. And we're going to see, if you don't take it seriously, you're going to lose Christianity. Look at 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 13. "For Adam was first formed, then Eve." Well, when was Adam formed?
Day 6.
Genesis 2, right? God got down on his knees, literally, not literally, but made him out of the ground. And then he took a rib and formed his wife. That's either a real event or it's not. If it's not a real event, then the Apostle Paul is deceived. He's putting the order of the hierarchy of the sexes based on that principle in Genesis chapter 2.
Kind of cagey.
Huh?
Cagey.
It gets even more profound because, look at 11:3. "I fear lest by any means, as the serpent beguiled Eve," there's now a serpent that he takes seriously. That's Genesis 3. Did the serpent beguile Eve? Well, from Genesis 3, yeah, he did. Now, if Genesis 3 is a mythology, this is another nonsense statement. That means that Paul has huge sections of his writing that doesn't make any sense. It's based on fantasy. It's not real. He's fearing that just as the serpent was able to beguile Eve, that somehow Satan, the serpent, will beguile the church. If Eve didn't exist, this means nothing. It's an attack on the Bible. It was from the beginning, the very beginning, and we'll see that a little bit later on in our presentation. just start looking to try to prove evolution wrong. Look for them as a person. There's a person behind that needs Jesus Christ, as a person who's guilty of sin. They've offended God Most High, and they're going to be held accountable one day. And they've got the feeling in their heart. They know there's going to be a day of judgment. Those are the people we're talking to, that person behind all the noise of evolution. So it's good to know what we know. It's good to study it. It's good to have answers. But when it comes down to it, let's look for the witness rather than the winning of the argument. Amen?
Amen.
Okay.